The human mind has an extraordinary ability to convince itself that what it experienced was nothing more than a dream, a hallucination, or perhaps the product of an overactive imagination. We tell ourselves these stories because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. But what happens when the evidence becomes undeniable? What happens when the memories refuse to fade, when the physical proof lingers, and when the experience is so vivid, so detailed, that dismissing it becomes impossible? Tonight, we're diving into accounts that challenge everything we think we know about our place in the universe. These aren't stories of fleeting lights in the sky or blurry photographs. These are detailed, documented encounters with beings from beyond our world, experiences so profound and disturbing that they've left permanent marks on those who lived through them. I'm going to share with you some of the most chilling, most meticulously documented cases of alien abduction ever recorded. These stories come from ordinary people living ordinary lives, people who had no reason to fabricate such extraordinary claims. Teachers, mechanics, nurses, farmers, people just like you and me, who found themselves thrust into a reality so alien, so incomprehensible, that it shattered their understanding of what was possible. What makes these particular cases so compelling isn't just the consistency of the details across completely unrelated witnesses. It's the way these experiences seem to follow a pattern, a methodology that suggests something far more organized and purposeful than random encounters. These aren't chance meetings with curious visitors from another world. These are calculated, systematic interactions with an intelligence that appears to have been studying us for decades, perhaps centuries. The stories you're about to hear contain elements that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality. They involve missing time, medical procedures performed by beings with technology beyond our comprehension, and glimpses into a larger agenda that we're only beginning to understand. Some of these accounts include details so specific, so medical in nature, that they could only have come from someone who actually experienced them. As we journey through these cases tonight, pay attention to the patterns that emerge. Notice how different people, separated by years and thousands of miles, describe remarkably similar experiences. Observe how their accounts include details that weren't part of popular culture at the time they occurred, details that only became widely known years later through other testimonies. But perhaps most unsettling of all, consider how these experiences have affected the lives of those who endured them. These aren't people seeking fame or fortune. Many of them struggled for years before finding the courage to speak publicly about what happened to them. Some have suffered ridicule, professional consequences, and personal relationships destroyed by their willingness to share their truth. The first case we'll examine tonight takes us to a remote stretch of highway in New Mexico, where a young couple's romantic evening drive became something far more sinister. It was the summer of 1975, and Janet Morrison was 23 years old, working as a nurse at a small hospital in Roswell. She was engaged to Michael Torres, a mechanic who'd grown up in the area and knew every back road and scenic overlook within 100 miles. On the night of July 15th, they decided to drive out to a spot Michael had discovered years earlier, a hilltop that offered spectacular views of the desert landscape under the stars. It was a clear night, with virtually no light pollution, the kind of evening that makes you feel small under the vast expanse of the universe. They'd been there for about an hour, sitting on the hood of Michael's pickup truck, when Janet noticed something unusual on the horizon. At first, she thought it was an aircraft of some kind, but as they watched, the object's behavior became increasingly erratic. It moved in ways that defied conventional physics, stopping and starting abruptly, changing direction at impossible angles, and at times seeming to hover completely motionless in the air. Michael, ever the skeptic, suggested it might be military aircraft from one of the nearby bases. The area was known for experimental flights, and strange lights in the sky weren't entirely uncommon. But as they continued to watch, the object began moving toward them, growing larger and more distinct with each passing moment. What they initially thought was a single craft revealed itself to be something far more complex. As it approached, they could see that it was massive, roughly triangular in shape, with a series of lights along its edges that pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. The most unnerving aspect was its complete silence. Despite its enormous size, the object made no sound whatsoever as it glided through the air above them. Janet would later describe feeling an overwhelming sense of dread as the craft positioned itself directly overhead. The stars disappeared, blocked by the object's bulk, and a strange bluish light began emanating from its underside. Both she and Michael felt a peculiar tingling sensation, as if the air itself had become charged with electricity. That's when their memories begin to fragment. Janet remembers Michael reaching for her hand, his grip tightening as they both realized something was terribly wrong. The next clear memory either of them has is of sitting in the truck, the engine running, with no recollection of how they got there or why they had started to leave. The drive home was conducted in an eerie silence. Both of them felt disoriented, confused, and strangely exhausted. When they finally reached Janet's apartment, they discovered something that would haunt them for years to come. What should have been a 2-hour evening drive had somehow consumed nearly 6 hours. They had lost 4 hours of their lives, with no memory of where that time had gone. Initially, both Janet and Michael tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps they had fallen asleep under the stars and simply forgotten about it. Maybe they had driven around more than they remembered, lost track of time while talking. But as the days passed, these explanations felt increasingly inadequate. Janet began experiencing vivid, disturbing dreams that felt more like memories than products of her imagination. In these dreams, she found herself in a sterile, white room, surrounded by beings that were humanoid, but decidedly not human. They were tall and thin, with elongated limbs and oversized heads. Their skin had a greyish pallor, and their eyes were large and black, completely devoid of what we would recognize as emotion. Michael was experiencing similar dreams, though he was more reluctant to discuss them. A practical man who prided himself on dealing with facts and tangible realities, he found these experiences deeply unsettling. But the dreams persisted, becoming more detailed and more disturbing with each passing night. In Janet's dreams, she was lying on what appeared to be an examination table, while several of these beings moved around her with purposeful efficiency. They seemed to be conducting some kind of medical procedure, using instruments that bore no resemblance to anything in her medical training. The beings communicated with each other, but not through speech as we understand it. Instead, they seemed to share thoughts directly, their intentions and instructions flowing between them without the need for words. The most terrifying aspect of these dreams was how real they felt. Janet could remember specific details with crystal clarity: the texture of the examination table beneath her, the cool temperature of the room, the way the being's hands felt when they touched her skin. These weren't the vague, symbolic images typically associated with dreams. They were precise, detailed memories that seemed to come from an actual experience. Michael's dreams followed a similar pattern, though his memories were more fragmented. He remembered being in a different room, also white and sterile, but larger than the one Janet described. There were other beings present, and they seemed to be showing him something, though he couldn't quite grasp what it was. The communication he experienced was different from Janet's account. Rather than medical procedures, his memories involved what seemed to be a kind of interrogation, though the questions weren't posed in any language he could understand. As weeks turned into months, both Janet and Michael found themselves struggling with the psychological impact of these experiences. Janet began having difficulty sleeping, afraid of what her dreams might reveal. Michael became increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours at work and avoiding discussions about that night. Their relationship, which had been strong and stable, began to show signs of strain. It was Janet who first suggested they seek professional help. Through her work at the hospital, she had connections with several psychiatrists and psychologists in the area. After careful consideration, they decided to consult with Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected therapist who specialized in trauma recovery. Dr. Chen's initial assessment was that both Janet and Michael were suffering from some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, though the cause remained unclear. She noted that their symptoms were consistent with individuals who had experienced a significant trauma, but the absence of any clear traumatic event made diagnosis difficult. It was during their third session that Dr. Chen first suggested the possibility of hypnotic regression. She explained that sometimes traumatic memories can be suppressed or fragmented, and that carefully conducted hypnosis might help recover these lost experiences. Both Janet and Michael were initially skeptical, but their desperation for answers eventually overcame their reservations. The first hypnosis session was conducted with Janet alone. Dr. Chen was careful to establish a safe, controlled environment, emphasizing that Janet could stop the session at any time if she felt uncomfortable. As Janet entered the hypnotic state, Dr. Chen guided her back to that night in July, asking her to describe what she remembered after seeing the strange craft. What emerged during that session was far more detailed and disturbing than Janet's dreams had suggested. Under hypnosis, she was able to recall being lifted from the truck by some invisible force, floating upward toward the waiting craft. She described the sensation of passing through what felt like a solid surface, though she couldn't explain how this was possible. Inside the craft, Janet's memories became even more vivid and terrifying. She found herself in a corridor that seemed to stretch impossibly far in both directions, with smooth walls that appeared to be made of some kind of luminescent material. The beings she had dreamed about were there, but now she could see them with perfect clarity. They were approximately 7 feet tall, with bodies that seemed almost skeletal in their thinness. Their heads were disproportionately large, with smooth, hairless skin that had a slightly translucent quality. But it was their eyes that Janet found most disturbing. They were enormous, taking up nearly half of their facial area, and completely black. When they looked at her, she felt as though they were seeing not just her physical form, but something deeper, something that made her feel utterly exposed and vulnerable. The beings moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy gravity. They didn't walk so much as glide, their feet barely seeming to touch the floor. When they communicated, it wasn't through speech, but through a kind of direct mental contact that was both intimate and invasive. Janet could feel their thoughts pressing against her mind, not in words, but in concepts and images that were somehow translated into understanding. They led her through several rooms, each serving what appeared to be a different purpose. In one room, she saw what looked like a 3-dimensional map of the solar system, with various planets and celestial bodies highlighted in different colors. In another, there were containers holding what appeared to be biological specimens, though she couldn't identify what they were. But it was the examination room that would prove to be the most traumatic part of her experience. The beings guided her to a table that molded itself to her body as she lay down, becoming softer in some areas and firmer in others until it provided perfect support. The material felt warm and slightly alive, as if it were responding to her presence. What happened next was a series of procedures that Janet found both fascinating and terrifying. The beings used instruments that seemed to be made of the same luminescent material as the walls, tools that appeared to change shape and function based on their intended use. Some of these devices were inserted into her body through various orifices, while others were simply held near her skin and seemed to scan or analyze her internal structure. Throughout the examination, Janet remained conscious, but found herself unable to move or speak. She could observe everything that was happening to her, but her body refused to respond to her commands. The beings seemed to be studying her reproductive system with particular interest, conducting procedures that felt invasive and uncomfortable, but weren't exactly painful. During this examination, Janet became aware of something that filled her with a deep, primal fear. She realized that this wasn't the first time she had been in this room. Fragmented memories began surfacing of previous visits, stretching back to her childhood. She remembered being a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, lying on this same table, while these same beings conducted similar procedures. The realization that she had been visited repeatedly throughout her life, that entire segments of her past had been hidden from her conscious mind, was perhaps more disturbing than the current experience itself. It suggested that she had never truly been in control of her own life, that these beings had been monitoring and manipulating her for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. As the session continued, Janet learned that she wasn't alone in this experience. The beings showed her images of other humans, people of all ages and backgrounds, who had undergone similar procedures. She saw children, adults, elderly individuals, all lying on similar tables in similar rooms, all being examined and tested by these same entities. The beings seemed to be conducting some kind of long-term study, gathering data about human physiology and psychology across multiple generations. Janet got the impression that this was part of a much larger project, one that had been ongoing for decades, perhaps centuries. One of the most chilling aspects of Janet's recovered memories was the revelation that the beings possessed detailed knowledge about her life that they shouldn't have had access to. They knew about her childhood, her family, her career choices, even intimate details about her relationship with Michael. This wasn't information they could have gathered through casual observation. It suggested a level of surveillance and monitoring that extended far beyond the moments of direct contact. The beings communicated to Janet that she had been selected for what they referred to as the program when she was very young. The concept came across not as words, but as a complex web of understanding that flooded her mind all at once. She was part of a carefully curated group of humans who were being studied across their entire lifespans, their genetic material harvested and analyzed, their psychological development monitored and occasionally influenced. What made Janet's case particularly disturbing was the physical evidence that began to emerge after her hypnosis sessions. She discovered small, perfectly round scars on her body that she had never noticed before, marks that appeared to be entry points for the instruments she remembered being used during her examinations. These scars were located in areas that would be impossible to reach accidentally, and they showed signs of having been made with technology far more advanced than anything available in human medicine. Michael's hypnosis sessions revealed a different but equally disturbing set of experiences. His memories focused less on medical procedures and more on what appeared to be psychological testing. He recalled being shown a series of images and scenarios, his reactions carefully monitored and recorded by the beings. Some of these images were of future events that hadn't yet occurred, suggesting that the beings possessed knowledge of upcoming developments in human history. During one particularly vivid session, Michael remembered being taken to what he described as an observation deck within the craft. Through transparent walls, he could see the Earth below, but it wasn't the Earth he knew. The continents were different, the climate patterns altered, and there were structures on the surface that defied description. The beings indicated that this was one possible future for humanity, a timeline that could be influenced by their ongoing research. The psychological impact of these recovered memories was devastating for both Janet and Michael. Janet began experiencing panic attacks at work, particularly when she encountered medical equipment that reminded her of the instruments used by the beings. Michael developed an intense fear of being alone, convinced that the beings were watching him and could take him again at any moment. Their relationship, already strained by the initial trauma, began to deteriorate further as they processed these revelations. Janet became obsessed with researching similar cases, spending hours reading accounts from other alleged abductees and looking for patterns that might explain what had happened to them. Michael, overwhelmed by the implications of his memories, began to withdraw emotionally, using work and alcohol as ways to avoid confronting the reality of their situation. Dr. Chen continued to work with both of them, but she found herself facing challenges that extended far beyond conventional therapy. The consistency and detail of their recovered memories, combined with the physical evidence that continued to emerge, made it increasingly difficult to dismiss their experiences as elaborate fantasies or psychological constructs. The case took another disturbing turn when Janet discovered that her medical records contained gaps and inconsistencies that she had never noticed before. Routine examinations showed evidence of procedures that she had no memory of undergoing, and there were periods of time when she had apparently been absent from work or social obligations with no explanation for her whereabouts. Most unsettling was the discovery that Janet had been pregnant twice without her knowledge. Medical tests revealed evidence of pregnancies that had been terminated very early in their development, procedures that had been performed with such precision that they left no lasting physical damage. Janet had no memory of these pregnancies, no recollection of the procedures that had ended them, and no explanation for how they could have occurred without her awareness. The beings, it seemed, were not just studying human reproduction, but actively manipulating it. Janet's recovered memories included images of what appeared to be hybrid offspring, beings that combined human and alien characteristics in ways that were both fascinating and horrifying. These hybrids were kept in special chambers within the craft, their development carefully monitored and controlled. The purpose of this hybridization program remained unclear, but the beings conveyed to Janet that it was part of a long-term project designed to ensure the survival of both species. They indicated that humanity was approaching a critical juncture in its development, a point where the choices made in the coming decades would determine whether the species would thrive or face extinction. As Janet's therapy sessions continued, she began to recall interactions with these hybrid beings. They appeared to be at various stages of development, some more human-like, others displaying more pronounced alien characteristics. The hybrids seemed to possess enhanced mental abilities, including telepathic communication and what appeared to be precognitive awareness of future events. The most disturbing aspect of these encounters was the emotional connection Janet felt with some of the hybrids. She began to suspect that some of them were created using her own genetic material, making them her offspring in a biological sense, even though she had no memory of contributing to their creation. The beings seemed to encourage this connection, allowing Janet to interact with the hybrids in ways that felt almost maternal. Michael's experiences during this period focused on what appeared to be training sessions. The beings showed him advanced technologies and concepts that were far beyond human understanding, seemingly attempting to prepare him for some future role. He was taught to operate devices that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, shown energy systems that could power entire cities without generating waste, and given glimpses of transportation methods that could traverse vast distances instantaneously. The purpose of this training remained unclear, but the beings indicated that Michael and others like him were being prepared to serve as intermediaries between humanity and their species. They would be the ones to help humanity adapt to the changes that were coming, to facilitate the integration of the two species in ways that would benefit both. As the months passed, both Janet and Michael began to notice changes in their abilities and perceptions. Janet found that she could sense things about her patients that weren't apparent through conventional medical examination. She could detect illnesses before they manifested symptoms, and she seemed to have an intuitive understanding of which treatments would be most effective for each individual. Michael discovered that he could understand and repair complex machinery without formal training, as if the knowledge had been implanted directly into his mind. He began to see patterns and connections in mechanical systems that weren't apparent to his colleagues, and he found himself drawn to projects involving advanced technology and energy systems. These enhanced abilities were both a blessing and a curse. While they made Janet and Michael more effective in their respective fields, they also served as constant reminders of their experiences with the beings. Every time Janet correctly diagnosed a condition that should have been undetectable, every time Michael solved a problem that had stumped more experienced technicians, they were reminded that they had been fundamentally changed by their encounters. The isolation that came with these abilities was perhaps the most difficult aspect of their situation. They couldn't discuss their enhanced capabilities with colleagues without raising questions about their origins. They couldn't fully explain their insights and intuitions without revealing the source of their knowledge. This created a sense of alienation from their peers and a growing feeling that they no longer fully belonged in human society. Dr. Chen documented their progress carefully, noting not only the psychological healing that was occurring, but also the emergence of abilities that seemed to defy conventional understanding. She found herself in the unusual position of treating patients whose experiences challenged her fundamental beliefs about reality and human potential. The case became even more complex when other individuals in the area began reporting similar experiences. Dr. Chen was contacted by several people who claimed to have had encounters with the same beings that Janet and Michael described. The consistency of these accounts, combined with the physical evidence that continued to emerge, made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the phenomenon as isolated incidents or psychological aberrations. One particularly compelling case involved a local rancher named Tom Bradley, who had discovered strange markings on his property that seemed to appear overnight. These markings were perfectly geometric, created with a precision that would have been impossible to achieve using conventional tools. More disturbing was the discovery that several of his cattle had been found dead with surgical-level wounds that removed specific organs and tissue samples. Tom's own memories of the nights when these incidents occurred were fragmented and confused, but under hypnosis, he recalled being taken aboard the same type of craft that Janet and Michael had described. His experiences involved being shown the cattle mutilations and having the purpose of these procedures explained to him. The beings were studying the effects of environmental pollution on mammalian physiology, using the cattle as test subjects to better understand how human bodies might be affected by similar contaminants. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the beings' apparent agenda. They weren't just studying human reproduction and psychology, but were also monitoring the health of the planet's ecosystem. Their research seemed to be part of a comprehensive assessment of Earth's viability as a long-term habitat for both human and alien life. The pattern of experiences that emerged from these cases suggested that the beings were conducting a systematic study of human civilization, examining every aspect of our biology, psychology, technology, and social structure. They appeared to be gathering data that would inform decisions about humanity's future and the role that our species might play in their larger plans. As Janet, Michael, and the other experiencers continued their recovery, they began to form a support network that helped them process their experiences and cope with the ongoing effects of their encounters. This group met regularly to discuss their memories, share new insights, and provide emotional support for one another. The meetings were facilitated by Dr. Chen, who had become something of an expert on the abduction phenomenon despite her initial skepticism. She documented the patterns that emerged from the group's collective experiences, noting the consistency of details across multiple witnesses and the way their accounts complemented and reinforced one another. One of the most significant discoveries to emerge from these group sessions was the realization that the beings' activities were not random or opportunistic, but followed a carefully planned schedule. The abductions seemed to occur at specific times of the year, often coinciding with astronomical events or solar activity patterns. This suggested that the beings were operating according to a timeline that was influenced by celestial mechanics and energy cycles. The implications of this discovery were profound. If the beings were following a predetermined schedule, it meant that their activities could potentially be predicted and perhaps even prepared for. It also suggested that their presence on Earth was not a recent development, but part of a long-term project that had been ongoing for decades or centuries. The group's research into the timing of these encounters led them to an uncomfortable conclusion. The beings weren't just studying humanity, they were preparing for something. The pattern of abductions had been accelerating over the past several decades, with more frequent encounters and increasingly sophisticated procedures. What had once been simple medical examinations had evolved into complex psychological conditioning sessions designed to prepare certain individuals for an unknown future role. Janet's latest recovered memories revealed the most disturbing aspect of this preparation. During her most recent encounter, which had occurred without her conscious awareness just 2 months earlier, the beings had shown her images of what appeared to be a massive evacuation scenario. Thousands of humans were being transported aboard enormous vessels, leaving behind a planet that had become uninhabitable due to environmental collapse and social breakdown. The beings communicated to Janet that this wasn't necessarily humanity's inevitable fate, but rather one of several possible timelines they had observed. Their research, they indicated, was partly designed to determine which timeline would ultimately manifest, and to ensure that certain individuals would be prepared to help guide humanity through whatever challenges lay ahead. Michael's corresponding memories from that same period involved training sessions that had become increasingly intensive and specific. The beings were teaching him to operate what appeared to be communication devices that could interface directly with human neural networks. These devices, they explained, would be crucial for maintaining contact with selected humans during the transition period that was approaching. The concept of a transition period was one that appeared repeatedly in the recovered memories of all the experiencers. The beings seemed to view humanity as a species approaching a critical evolutionary juncture, a point where the choices made in the coming years would determine whether humans would advance to a higher level of consciousness and capability or face extinction due to their inability to adapt to changing conditions. This transition wasn't described as a single catastrophic event, but rather as a gradual process that would unfold over several decades. Environmental changes, technological developments, and social upheavals would create conditions that would test humanity's resilience and adaptability. Those who could successfully navigate these challenges would emerge as part of a new phase of human evolution, while those who couldn't would be left behind. The beings' role in this process remained ambiguous. They presented themselves as neither saviors nor conquerors, but as facilitators, entities whose job was to ensure that the transition proceeded as smoothly as possible. They had been monitoring human development for generations, identifying individuals who showed the potential to serve as bridges between the old world and the new. Dr. Chen's analysis of the group's collective experiences revealed that each member had been selected for specific qualities that would be valuable during this transition period. Janet's medical knowledge and natural empathy made her ideal for helping humans adapt to new physical and psychological realities. Michael's technical aptitude and problem-solving abilities would be crucial for maintaining and operating advanced technologies. Tom Bradley's connection to the land and his understanding of natural systems would be essential for helping humans develop sustainable relationships with their environment. Each member of the group had been carefully chosen and prepared for roles that would become increasingly important as the transition accelerated. The most unsettling aspect of this revelation was the realization that their entire lives had been subtly guided and influenced by these beings. Career choices, relationship decisions, even their decision to seek therapy after their initial encounter, all seemed to have been part of a larger plan designed to prepare them for their eventual roles. Janet discovered that her choice to become a nurse hadn't been entirely her own. Under deep hypnosis, she recalled childhood encounters where the beings had influenced her interests and aptitudes, steering her toward a medical career that would provide her with the knowledge and skills they would later need her to possess. Michael's fascination with mechanical systems and his natural ability to understand complex technologies had been similarly cultivated. The beings had been subtly enhancing his abilities for years, preparing him for the day when he would need to serve as an intermediary between human and alien technologies. This level of long-term planning and manipulation raised disturbing questions about human free will and autonomy. If the beings had been influencing the lives of selected individuals for decades, how many other people were unknowingly part of their program? How many of humanity's achievements and developments had been guided by alien intervention. The group's research into historical accounts of similar phenomena suggested that this influence might extend back centuries. Ancient texts and folklore from cultures around the world contained references to beings from the sky who provided knowledge and guidance to select individuals. These accounts, previously dismissed as mythology or religious allegory, began to take on new significance when viewed through the lens of the group's experiences. Dr. Chen began collaborating with historians and anthropologists to examine these historical accounts more carefully. What emerged was a pattern of contact that seemed to correlate with major developments in human civilization. The advent of agriculture, the development of writing systems, advances in astronomy and mathematics, all seem to have occurred during periods when contact with these beings was most frequently reported. This suggested that the beings had been involved in guiding human development for millennia, subtly influencing the course of civilization to ensure that humanity would eventually reach a level of advancement that would make the current transition possible. The modern abduction phenomenon wasn't a new development, but rather the latest phase of a relationship that had been ongoing since the dawn of human consciousness. The implications of this discovery were staggering. If the beings had been guiding human development for thousands of years, then much of what humanity considered to be its own achievement might actually be the result of alien intervention. The technologies, philosophies, and social structures that defined human civilization might all be products of a carefully orchestrated plan designed to prepare the species for its eventual integration with a larger cosmic community. Janet's most recent memories included glimpses of this larger community, a vast network of intelligent species that spanned multiple star systems and dimensions. Humanity, she learned, was not unique in having been guided through this type of transition. Countless other species had undergone similar processes, each one carefully prepared for their eventual inclusion in what the beings referred to as the collective. The collective wasn't described as a hive mind or a loss of individual identity, but rather as a state of enhanced consciousness where individual beings retained their uniqueness while gaining access to the accumulated knowledge and experience of all other members. It was presented as the next stage of evolutionary development, a level of existence that would allow formerly isolated species to work together toward common goals. Michael's training sessions had begun to focus on the technologies and concepts that would be necessary for humanity to participate in this collective consciousness. He was shown devices that could enhance human mental capabilities, allowing individuals to process information at speeds that would have been impossible with unaugmented minds. He learned about energy systems that could power entire civilizations without depleting natural resources, and transportation methods that could traverse vast distances instantaneously. The beings emphasized that these technologies would not be simply given to humanity, but would need to be earned through the successful completion of the transition process. Species that failed to develop the necessary wisdom and maturity to use such power responsibly were not permitted to join the collective, regardless of their technological achievements. This requirement for wisdom and maturity was apparently the reason for the being's extensive psychological testing and conditioning. They were not just evaluating humanity's technical capabilities, but also assessing the species' emotional and ethical development. The hybrid breeding program was designed to create individuals who combined human creativity and passion with alien rationality and long-term thinking. The most disturbing aspect of this revelation was the realization that not all of humanity would be included in this transition. The beings made it clear that the process would be selective, with only those individuals who demonstrated the necessary qualities being chosen to participate in the next phase of human evolution. The rest would be left to face the challenges of the transition period without guidance or support. Janet's memories included images of the selection process, a systematic evaluation of human individuals based on their genetic potential, psychological stability, and capacity for growth. Those who met the criteria would be gradually prepared for their new roles, while those who didn't would be allowed to live out their lives in the increasingly chaotic world that would emerge during the transition period. The ethical implications of this selective process were deeply troubling to the group. The idea that an alien species had the right to determine humanity's future, to decide which individuals would be saved and which would be abandoned, challenged fundamental beliefs about human dignity and self-determination. Dr. Chen struggled with these revelations as both a therapist and a human being. Her training had taught her to help people process traumatic experiences and integrate them into their understanding of reality. But the experiences her patients were describing seemed to transcend the boundaries of individual trauma and touch on questions that affected the entire species. The group's meetings became increasingly focused on the question of resistance. If the beings' plans were as comprehensive as they appeared to be, was there any way for humanity to assert its independence and choose its own path? Or were the species already so thoroughly integrated into the aliens' agenda that resistance was futile? Some members of the group argued that the beings' intentions, while manipulative, were ultimately benevolent. They pointed to the advanced technologies and enhanced consciousness that would be available to those who successfully completed the transition. They suggested that humanity's current path was leading towards self-destruction, and that alien intervention, however unwelcome, might be necessary for the species' survival. Others, led by Michael, believed that humanity had the right to determine its own fate, even if that fate included the possibility of extinction. They argued that the being's selective process was fundamentally unjust, and that any resistance, no matter how futile it might seem, was preferable to passive acceptance of alien control. Janet found herself torn between these perspectives. Her medical training had taught her to value life above all else, and she could see the potential benefits of the being's intervention. But her experiences with the hybrids had shown her the cost of this intervention, the way it reduced human beings to genetic material to be manipulated and combined according to alien specifications. The debate within the group reflected a larger question that would soon face all of humanity. When confronted with the reality of alien intervention in human affairs, how should the species respond? The beings had made it clear that the transition was already underway, and that humanity's choices would determine not whether it occurred, but how it unfolded. As the group continued to meet and share their experiences, they began to notice changes in the world around them that seemed to confirm the beings' predictions. Environmental disasters were becoming more frequent and severe. Social and political institutions were showing signs of strain and instability. Technological developments were accelerating at an unprecedented pace, creating both opportunities and dangers that humanity seemed unprepared to handle. The members of the group found themselves in the unique position of being aware of these changes before they became apparent to the general population. Their enhanced abilities allowed them to perceive patterns and connections that others missed, giving them insights into the forces that were shaping the world's future. This knowledge was both a gift and a burden. They could see the challenges that lay ahead, but they were powerless to prevent them. The beings had made it clear that the transition process could not be stopped or significantly altered, only navigated with greater or lesser success. The group's role, they gradually realized, was not to resist the transition, but to help others understand and adapt to it. They would serve as bridges between the old world and the new, helping humanity navigate the challenges ahead while maintaining as much of their essential humanity as possible. This realization brought with it a sense of acceptance and purpose that had been missing from their earlier discussions. Instead of focusing on resistance or escape, they began to concentrate on preparation and education. They started documenting their experiences in greater detail, creating a record that could help others understand what was happening and how to cope with it. Dr. Chen's role evolved from therapist to researcher and chronicler. She began working with other professionals who had encountered similar phenomena, building a network of individuals who could study and document the transition process as it unfolded. Her goal was to create a comprehensive understanding of what was happening to humanity and to develop strategies for helping people adapt to the changes ahead. The work was difficult and often frustrating. The being's influence was subtle and pervasive, making it difficult to distinguish between natural human development and alien manipulation. The physical evidence of their activities was often ambiguous, open to multiple interpretations, depending on the observer's beliefs and preconceptions. But the group persevered, driven by the knowledge that their work might make the difference between humanity's successful adaptation to the new reality and its descent into chaos and confusion. They had been chosen for this role not because they were special or superior to other humans, but because they had the specific combination of abilities and experiences that would be necessary to help their species navigate the challenges ahead. As the months passed, the group's understanding of their situation continued to evolve. They began to see themselves not as victims of alien abduction, but as participants in a process that was larger than any individual human life. They were part of a story that had been unfolding for millennia, a story that was now approaching its climax. The being's activities were becoming more frequent and more visible, though still largely hidden from public awareness. The hybrid breeding program was accelerating, with new generations of beings that were increasingly human-like in appearance, but possessed enhanced mental and physical capabilities. These hybrids were being prepared for roles that would become crucial as the transition process reached its critical phase. Janet's latest encounters included meetings with adult hybrids who had been living among humans for years without their true nature being detected. These beings served as observers and facilitators, subtly influencing human development while remaining hidden within human society. Their presence explained many of the technological and social developments that had seemed to accelerate beyond natural human capabilities. The revelation that hybrids had been living among humans for years sent shockwaves through the group. Michael began to question every significant encounter he'd had in recent years, wondering if the helpful stranger who had appeared at just the right moment during a mechanical breakdown, or the unusually insightful colleague who had guided him toward specific projects, might have been something other than human. Janet's medical experience provided a different perspective on this infiltration. She recalled patients who had seemed to recover from serious illnesses with remarkable speed, individuals whose blood work showed anomalies that didn't fit any known medical patterns, and colleagues who displayed an uncanny ability to diagnose conditions that should have been impossible to detect through conventional means. The group's research into this hidden population revealed a network of beings that extended far beyond their local area. These hybrids appeared to be positioned in key roles throughout society, working as researchers, teachers, government officials, and business leaders. Their influence was subtle but pervasive, guiding human development in directions that aligned with the being's long-term objectives. Dr. Chen's investigation into this phenomenon led her to examine historical records of individuals who had displayed exceptional abilities or insights that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Throughout history, there had been inventors, philosophers, and leaders who had made breakthrough discoveries or demonstrated wisdom that appeared to come from sources beyond conventional human knowledge. The pattern that emerged suggested that hybrid beings had been integrated into human society for generations, each one carefully positioned to influence the course of human development at critical moments. The Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the industrial age, all appeared to have been periods when hybrid activity had been particularly intense. This long-term infiltration explained many of the inconsistencies and gaps in human historical records. Technologies that should have taken centuries to develop had appeared with surprising suddenness. Social movements that should have faced insurmountable obstacles had succeeded with remarkable ease. Scientific discoveries that should have required extensive research had been made by individuals who seemed to possess intuitive understanding of complex principles. Janet's memories from her most recent encounters revealed that this infiltration was entering a new phase. The beings were no longer content to work through a small number of carefully placed hybrids. They were beginning to implement a more comprehensive integration process, one that would involve direct contact with larger segments of the human population. The selection process that had once focused on a few dozen individuals in each region was being expanded to include thousands. The beings were identifying people who possessed the genetic markers and psychological profiles that would make them suitable for enhancement or replacement. The transition from a hidden influence to open integration was beginning. Michael's training sessions had evolved to include instruction in what the beings called revelation protocols. He was being taught how to help humans cope with the psychological shock of discovering that their reality was far different from what they had believed. The beings had learned from previous transition events with other species that the revelation process needed to be carefully managed to prevent social collapse. The protocols involved gradual exposure to the truth, beginning with individuals who had already demonstrated some awareness of the phenomenon and expanding outward to include increasingly larger populations. Each person would be prepared according to their individual psychological profile, with some requiring extensive conditioning, while others could be brought to acceptance more quickly. Janet's role in this process was to serve as a mediator between the beings and the human medical community. Her enhanced abilities would allow her to identify individuals who were experiencing the early stages of contact or integration, and her medical credentials would provide credibility when she attempted to help them understand what was happening to them. The beings had provided her with detailed information about the physiological changes that humans would experience during the integration process. These changes were designed to enhance human capabilities while maintaining compatibility with hybrid genetics. The process was irreversible once begun, making the selection and preparation phases critical to its success. Tom Bradley's role focused on the environmental aspects of the transition. His ranching background and connection to the land had made him particularly sensitive to the ecological changes that were already beginning to occur. The beings had shown him that the environmental crises facing humanity were not entirely natural phenomena, but were being influenced by their activities. The cattle mutilations that had occurred on his property were part of a comprehensive monitoring program designed to track the effects of environmental manipulation on mammalian physiology. The beings were using this data to fine-tune their integration process, ensuring that the enhanced humans would be capable of surviving in the altered environment that was being created. The environmental changes were being implemented gradually, with each modification carefully calibrated to push human adaptation in specific directions. Climate patterns were being altered to favor certain genetic traits, while discouraging others. Atmospheric composition was being adjusted to support the hybrid beings, while creating stress conditions that would eliminate humans who lacked the necessary adaptability. These revelations forced the group to confront the true scope of the beings' intervention in human affairs. This wasn't simply a matter of occasional abductions or the insertion of hybrid individuals into human society. The beings were systematically re-engineering both humanity and the planet itself to create conditions that would support their long-term objectives. Dr. Chen's analysis of the group's experiences revealed that the beings possessed a level of technological sophistication that was difficult to comprehend. They could manipulate matter at the subatomic level, alter the flow of time within localized areas, and influence human consciousness in ways that left no detectable trace. Their abilities seemed to transcend the boundaries of science and enter the realm of what humans would consider magic. The group's meetings became increasingly focused on the question of human agency within this vast manipulation. If the beings possessed such overwhelming technological superiority, and if their intervention in human affairs was so comprehensive, what meaningful choices remained for humanity? Were they simply puppets being guided through a predetermined script, or did they retain some capacity for independent action? Janet's latest memories suggested that this question was not merely philosophical, but had practical implications for the success of the transition process. The beings had discovered that forced integration was less effective than voluntary acceptance. Humans who willingly participated in the process adapted more successfully and retained more of their essential humanity than those who were compelled to undergo transformation. This preference for voluntary participation was the reason for the beings' elaborate preparation and conditioning programs. They were not simply imposing their will on humanity, but were attempting to create conditions where humans would choose to accept integration because they recognized its benefits and necessity. The group began to understand that their role was not to resist or accept the beings' plans, but to help humanity make an informed choice about its future. They would serve as educators and guides, helping people understand the true nature of their situation and the options available to them. This realization brought with it a sense of responsibility that was both empowering and terrifying. The decisions they made and the actions they took could influence the course of human history. The information they shared and the way they shared it could determine whether humanity approached the transition with wisdom and grace, or with fear and confusion. Michael's technical training had progressed to the point where he could begin to understand the principles behind the being's advanced technologies. He learned that their abilities were not magic, but were based on a sophisticated understanding of the fundamental forces that governed reality. Matter, energy, space, and time were not separate phenomena, but different aspects of a unified field that could be manipulated by those who possessed the necessary knowledge and tools. The beings were teaching him to operate devices that could interface with this unified field, allowing him to perform feats that would seem impossible to unenhanced humans. He could influence the behavior of electronic systems, alter the properties of materials, and even affect the flow of time within limited areas. These abilities came with strict limitations and safeguards. The beings made it clear that the technologies they were sharing were not toys or weapons, but tools for facilitating the transition process. They could only be used for purposes that aligned with the being's objectives, and any attempt to use them for personal gain or destructive purposes would result in their immediate deactivation. Janet's medical training had been similarly enhanced, giving her the ability to perceive and manipulate the human body's energy systems. She could detect diseases and injuries that were invisible to conventional medical instruments, and she could accelerate the healing process by directing energy flows within the patient's body. Her enhanced abilities had already begun to attract attention from her colleagues and patients. She was developing a reputation for achieving remarkable results with cases that other doctors had given up on. But she had to be careful not to display her abilities too openly, as the beings had warned her that premature revelation could disrupt the carefully planned integration process. The group's enhanced abilities were not unique. Dr. Chen's research revealed that similar phenomena were occurring around the world, with individuals in various fields beginning to display capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. Artists were creating works that seemed to transcend conventional aesthetic boundaries. Scientists were making discoveries that leaped far beyond the current state of knowledge. Engineers were developing technologies that shouldn't have been possible with existing materials and methods. This global pattern of enhancement suggested that the being's preparation program was far more extensive than the group had initially realized. They were not dealing with a local phenomenon, but with a worldwide transformation that was affecting thousands, perhaps millions of people. The implications of this discovery were staggering. If the beings were simultaneously preparing so many individuals for integration, then the transition process was much closer to completion than anyone had imagined. The careful, gradual approach that had characterized their activities for decades was giving way to a more aggressive and comprehensive implementation. Janet's most recent encounters included glimpses of massive preparation facilities that existed in locations that seemed to be outside normal space-time. These facilities contained thousands of humans at various stages of the integration process, all being prepared for roles in the post-transition world. The scale of the operation was beyond anything the group had previously imagined. The beings explained that the acceleration of the program was necessary because humanity was approaching what they called the convergence point, a moment when the various factors they had been manipulating would combine to create conditions that would make the transition inevitable. Environmental collapse, social upheaval, and technological singularity were all approaching simultaneously, creating a perfect storm that would reshape human civilization. Those who had been prepared for integration would be equipped to survive and thrive in the post-convergence world. They would possess the enhanced abilities, technological knowledge, and psychological resilience necessary to rebuild human society according to the being's specifications. Those who had not been prepared would face extinction or absorption into the new order as subordinate beings. The group's role in this process was to serve as intermediaries between the prepared and unprepared populations. They would help ease the transition by providing guidance and support to those who were just beginning to experience the effects of the convergence. Their enhanced abilities would allow them to function effectively in the chaotic conditions that would characterize the transition period. Michael's training had progressed to include instruction in social engineering and crowd psychology. He was being taught how to influence large groups of people, guiding their reactions and decisions in ways that would minimize panic and resistance. The beings had learned from previous transition events that social collapse could be prevented if the right individuals were positioned to provide leadership and direction during the critical period. The psychological techniques he was learning were based on the same principles that governed the being's telepathic abilities. Human consciousness, they explained, was not as individual and isolated as people believed. Thoughts, emotions, and intentions created fields of influence that could be perceived and manipulated by those who possessed the necessary skills. This revelation forced the group to reconsider their understanding of human nature and free will. If consciousness was a field phenomenon that could be influenced externally, then the boundaries between individual identity and collective awareness were far more fluid than previously believed. The being's ability to influence human behavior might not be as invasive as it initially appeared, but could be seen as a natural extension of processes that were already occurring within human society. Janet's medical research had led her to similar conclusions about the nature of human biology. The body's various systems were not separate entities, but were parts of an integrated whole that responded to influences from both internal and external sources. Disease and health were not simply matters of individual physiology, but were affected by environmental factors, social conditions, and even psychological states. Her enhanced abilities allowed her to perceive these connections directly, giving her insights into the fundamental unity that underlay apparent diversity. She could see how a patient's emotional state affected their immune system, how their relationships influenced their cellular regeneration, and how their beliefs shaped their physical reality. These insights were preparing her for a role in the post-transition world, where the boundaries between medicine, psychology, and spiritual practice would be dissolved. The enhanced humans would require a more holistic approach to health and well-being, one that addressed the individual as part of a larger interconnected system. Dr. Chen's role in documenting and analyzing the group's experiences had evolved into something that resembled anthropological research. She was studying the emergence of a new form of human consciousness, one that was being shaped by the interaction between human and alien influences. Her work was providing insights into the psychological and social changes that would characterize the post-transition world. The patterns she was discovering suggested that the being's intervention was not simply imposing an alien agenda on humanity, but was facilitating the emergence of capabilities that were already latent within human potential. The enhanced abilities that the group members were displaying were not entirely foreign additions, but were developments of capacities that had always existed in rudimentary form. This realization had profound implications for understanding the nature of the transition process. Rather than being conquered or replaced by alien entities, humanity was being guided toward the realization of its own evolutionary potential. The beings were not invaders, but were teachers and facilitators, helping humanity transcend the limitations that had constrained its development for millennia. The group's acceptance of this perspective marked a significant shift in their understanding of their situation. They began to see themselves not as victims of alien manipulation, but as participants in a cosmic evolutionary process. Their experiences, however traumatic they might have been initially, were preparing them for roles in a larger story that extended far beyond the boundaries of individual human lives. This shift in perspective brought with it a sense of purpose and meaning that had been missing from their earlier discussions. Instead of focusing on resistance or escape, they began to concentrate on preparation and service. They were being called to help humanity navigate one of the most significant transformations in its history, and they were determined to fulfill that calling with wisdom and compassion. The group's meetings became planning sessions for the work that lay ahead. They began developing strategies for identifying and supporting other individuals who were experiencing the early stages of contact or integration. They created networks of communication that could function effectively even under the chaotic conditions that would characterize the transition period. Janet's medical connections provided access to healthcare systems that would be crucial for monitoring and supporting the physical changes that humans would experience during integration. Michael's technical expertise would be essential for maintaining and operating the advanced technologies that would become available as the transition progressed. Tom Bradley's agricultural knowledge would be vital for developing sustainable food production systems that could function in the altered environment that was being created. Dr. Chen's research and documentation efforts would provide the historical record that future generations would need to understand how the transformation had occurred. Each member of the group was developing specialized knowledge and capabilities that would be crucial for different aspects of the transition process. They were becoming the foundation of a new kind of human society, one that would be characterized by enhanced abilities, expanded consciousness, and direct participation in a larger cosmic community. The being's final preparations for the convergence point were becoming increasingly visible to those who knew how to look for them. Weather patterns were shifting in ways that couldn't be explained by conventional meteorology. Geological activity was increasing in regions that had been stable for centuries. Electromagnetic anomalies were being detected by sensitive instruments around the world. These changes were not random, but were part of a carefully orchestrated preparation for the moment when the hidden aspects of the being's intervention would be revealed to the general population. The convergence point would mark the end of the secret phase of the transition and the beginning of open integration between human and alien civilizations. The group's enhanced abilities were allowing them to perceive the approach of this moment with increasing clarity. They could feel the tension building in the collective human consciousness as unconscious awareness of the impending change began to penetrate the barriers that had kept it hidden. Dreams were becoming more vivid and prophetic. Intuitive abilities were spontaneously manifesting in people who had never displayed such capacities before. The time for preparation was drawing to a close. Soon, the group would be called upon to fulfill the roles they had been trained for, to serve as bridges between the world that was ending and the world that was beginning. They had been chosen not because they were special or superior to other humans, but because they possessed the specific combination of abilities and experiences that would be necessary to help their species navigate the most challenging period in its history. As they prepared for the work ahead, the group members felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. They knew that the transition would be difficult and that not everyone would successfully adapt to the new reality. But they also knew that they had been given the tools and knowledge necessary to help as many people as possible make the journey successfully. The convergence point was approaching, and with it would come the revelation that humanity had never been alone in the universe. The secret that had been hidden for so long would finally be revealed, and the true story of human development would begin to unfold. The group stood ready to help their species take its next step into a larger and more complex reality, one where the boundaries between human and alien, between individual and collective, would be forever transformed. In the quiet moments before the storm, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a traumatic encounter with the unknown had evolved into an understanding of their place in a vast cosmic drama. They had been chosen to play a crucial role in one of the most significant events in human history, and they were determined to fulfill that role with courage, wisdom, and compassion. The night sky above them held secrets that would soon be revealed to all humanity. The stars that had once seemed so distant and mysterious would soon be recognized as waypoints in a vast network of intelligent civilizations. And the beings who had guided and shaped human development from the shadows would finally step into the light, ready to welcome humanity into the larger community of conscious beings that filled the universe. The convergence was coming, and with it would come the transformation of everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the cosmos. The group that had been forged in the crucible of alien contact was ready to help their species navigate this monumental change, to serve as guides and teachers in the new world that was about to be born. The implications of what they had learned weighed heavily on each member of the group as they prepared for their expanded roles in the coming revelation. Janet found herself spending sleepless nights at the hospital, watching patients with new eyes, wondering which ones carried the genetic markers that would make them candidates for integration. Every unusual recovery, every patient who seemed to heal faster than medical science could explain, became a potential indicator of the being's influence. During one particularly quiet night shift, Janet encountered something that would fundamentally change her understanding of how widespread the being's intervention had become. She was checking on a patient in the intensive care unit, an elderly man who had been brought in after a severe heart attack. According to his chart, he should have been in critical condition, barely clinging to life. Instead, she found him sitting up in bed, his eyes alert and focused, displaying none of the weakness or confusion typically associated with his condition. When she approached to check his vital signs, the man looked directly at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His eyes seemed to hold depths that were impossible for someone in his condition, and when he spoke, his voice carried an quality that resonated in ways that transcended normal human speech. "You're beginning to understand," he said, though his lips barely moved. The words seemed to form directly in her mind, familiar yet alien in their cadence. "The preparation is nearly complete." Janet's enhanced abilities allowed her to perceive what others couldn't see. The man's energy signature was different from any human she had encountered, more complex and layered, as if multiple consciousness were operating within a single form. She realized she was looking at one of the advanced hybrids, a being so perfectly integrated into human society that even sophisticated medical equipment couldn't detect the difference. The hybrid continued to communicate with her through the telepathic connection that had become second nature to her since her encounters began. He explained that beings like him had been positioned throughout human society for generations, monitoring and guiding development from within. They weren't replacements for humans, but were evolutionary bridges, demonstrating what humanity could become through successful integration. "Your role is crucial," the hybrid conveyed. "When the convergence occurs, humans will need guides who can help them understand that transformation is not destruction, but evolution. You will be among those who help your species embrace its destiny rather than fight against it." Michael's experiences during this period were taking on an increasingly technical focus. His latest training sessions involved learning to operate what the beings called consciousness interfaces, devices that could directly connect human minds to the vast information networks that spanned the galaxy. These interfaces would be essential for helping humans adapt to the expanded awareness that would characterize post-transition existence. The technology was unlike anything in human experience. Rather than external devices that required manual operation, these interfaces integrated directly with the user's neural pathways, becoming extensions of their consciousness rather than separate tools. Through these connections, Michael could access information from civilizations across the galaxy, understanding concepts and technologies that would have taken human scientists centuries to develop independently. During one particularly intensive session, Michael found himself connected to what seemed to be a living library of cosmic knowledge. He could perceive the histories of countless worlds, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the patterns that governed the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. The experience was overwhelming at first, but gradually he began to understand the principles that unified all intelligent life. He learned that the transition humanity was experiencing was not unique, but was part of a natural process that every sentient species underwent when it reached a certain level of development. The beings who were guiding this process had themselves undergone similar transformations eons ago, evolving from physical entities limited by the constraints of matter and energy to consciousness that could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The hybrid breeding program, Michael discovered, was not an attempt to replace humanity, but was a method of preserving human characteristics while adding capabilities that would be necessary for survival in the expanded reality that awaited. The hybrids were not alien invaders, but were the next stage of human evolution, beings who retained the creativity, passion, and individuality that made humanity unique, while gaining the wisdom and capabilities needed to participate in galactic civilization. Tom Bradley's understanding of the environmental changes occurring on Earth deepened as his connection to the being's monitoring systems became more sophisticated. He could perceive the planet as a living organism, its systems interconnected and responsive to influences that operated on scales both microscopic and cosmic. The environmental crises that seemed random and chaotic to most humans were actually part of a carefully orchestrated transformation designed to prepare the planet for its new role as a bridge between dimensions. The cattle mutilations that had first brought him into contact with the beings were part of a comprehensive biological monitoring program that extended far beyond his ranch. Similar activities were occurring worldwide, with the beings tracking the effects of their environmental modifications on all forms of life. They were not causing the changes out of malice, but were managing a transition that would have occurred naturally over millions of years, compressing it into a timeline that would allow current human generations to participate in the outcome. Tom's enhanced perception allowed him to see the subtle signs of this transformation everywhere. Plants were adapting to new atmospheric conditions, developing characteristics that would allow them to thrive in the altered environment. Animals were displaying behavioral changes that seemed random, but were actually responses to modifications in the planet's magnetic field and energy patterns. The entire biosphere was being gently guided toward a new equilibrium that would support both traditional Earth life and the hybrid beings who would soon become its primary inhabitants. Dr. Chen's research had expanded to include collaboration with colleagues around the world who were encountering similar phenomena. Through secure communications networks that had been established by individuals with enhanced abilities, she was able to share information and coordinate research with other professionals who were studying the emergence of what could only be described as a new form of human consciousness. The pattern that emerged from this global research was both fascinating and disturbing. The being's intervention was not limited to any particular region or culture, but was occurring simultaneously across all continents and among all ethnic groups. The selection criteria appeared to be based on genetic factors that transcended traditional human racial categories, suggesting that the beings were working with biological markers that reflected deeper evolutionary potentials. What made the research particularly challenging was the way memories of encounters were being selectively modified or suppressed. Many individuals who showed signs of having been contacted had no conscious recollection of their experiences, making it difficult to gather comprehensive data about the scope of the program. Only through careful psychological analysis and sometimes hypnotic regression could the hidden experiences be brought to light. Dr. Chen's work revealed that the memory modification process was not simply a matter of erasing traumatic experiences, but was a sophisticated form of consciousness programming designed to ensure that individuals would be prepared for their eventual roles without being overwhelmed by knowledge they weren't yet ready to process. The memories were not destroyed, but were sealed away until the appropriate time for their revelation. The psychological profiles of individuals who had been contacted showed consistent patterns regardless of their cultural background or personal history. They tended to be highly intelligent, but not necessarily in ways that conventional testing could measure. They displayed unusual degrees of empathy and intuition, often seeming to understand things about people and situations that they shouldn't have been able to perceive through normal means. Many of them had experienced what they described as prophetic dreams or visions throughout their lives, glimpses of possible futures that often proved to be remarkably accurate. They seemed to be naturally attuned to the subtle energies and patterns that governed reality, making them ideal candidates for the enhanced awareness that would characterize post-transition existence. The group's meetings had evolved into something resembling a think tank, focused on developing strategies for the approaching revelation. They spent hours analyzing the information they had gathered, looking for patterns that might help them understand the timing and nature of the convergence point. Their enhanced abilities allowed them to perceive connections and relationships that would have been invisible to unaugmented human consciousness. One of the most significant discoveries to emerge from their research was the realization that the being's timeline was being influenced by factors beyond their control. Solar activity, cosmic radiation patterns, and gravitational influences from other star systems were all affecting the conditions on Earth in ways that were accelerating the natural processes the beings had been managing for millennia. The convergence point was not a date that had been arbitrarily chosen, but was the moment when these various cosmic factors would align to create conditions that would make the transition inevitable. The being's preparation program had been designed to ensure that humanity would be ready when this moment arrived, but they could not control its timing with perfect precision. Janet's latest encounters revealed that the beings were experiencing something analogous to anxiety as the convergence approached. Their vast intelligence and technological capabilities did not make them immune to uncertainty about the outcome of the transition process. They had guided many species through similar transformations, but each one presented unique challenges and variables that could not be completely predicted or controlled. The success of the transition depended not only on the being's preparation, but on humanity's response to the revelation of their presence. If humans reacted with fear and resistance, the process could become chaotic and destructive. If they responded with acceptance and cooperation, the transition could proceed smoothly and result in a harmonious integration of human and alien consciousness. The beings had learned from previous transitions that the key factor determining success was the presence of prepared individuals who could serve as bridges between the old reality and the new. These individuals needed to be respected members of their communities who could provide credible guidance and support during the difficult period of adjustment that would follow the revelation. Michael's training had reached the point where he could begin to understand the being's true nature and origins. They were not simply advanced extraterrestrials from distant planets, but were consciousness that had evolved beyond the need for physical form. They could manifest in material reality when necessary, but their essential existence transcended the boundaries of matter, energy, space, and time. The physical forms that humans perceived during encounters were projections designed to provide a reference point that human consciousness could process. The being's actual nature was so far beyond human comprehension that direct contact would have been impossible without these intermediary forms. Even the hybrid beings were simplified representations of what the fully evolved consciousness could become. This revelation helped explain many of the puzzling aspects of the abduction phenomenon. The beings' seeming inconsistencies, their ability to appear and disappear at will, their mastery of technologies that seemed to violate physical laws, all made sense when understood in the context of consciousness that operated according to principles that transcended material limitations. The beings were not conquering humanity, but were offering it the opportunity to join them in a form of existence that was unimaginably rich and complex. The transition was not a loss of human identity, but was an expansion of human potential that would allow the species to participate in the cosmic community of evolved consciousness. Tom Bradley's connection to the environmental monitoring systems had progressed to the point where he could perceive the planet's transformation in real time. He could feel the subtle shifts in magnetic fields, the adjustments in atmospheric composition, and the modifications in the planet's energy patterns. The changes were occurring so gradually that most humans were unaware of them, but their cumulative effect was preparing the Earth for its new role as a dimensional bridge. The beings explained that planets capable of supporting conscious life were rare and precious resources in the cosmic community. Earth's unique characteristics made it particularly valuable as a location where consciousness could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The environmental modifications were not preparing the planet for alien colonization, but were enhancing its natural capabilities to serve as a hub for interdimensional communication and travel. The hybrid beings were not invaders, but were the first inhabitants of this enhanced Earth, beings who could exist comfortably in both the traditional three-dimensional reality and the expanded multidimensional space that was being created. They would serve as guides and teachers for humans who chose to undergo the transformation necessary to participate in this new form of existence. Dr. Chen's research into the historical aspects of the beings' intervention had revealed evidence of their influence dating back to the earliest human civilizations. Ancient texts and artifacts from cultures around the world contained references to beings from the sky who had provided knowledge and guidance to select individuals. These accounts, previously dismissed as mythology or religious allegory, now took on new significance as historical records of actual encounters. The pattern of intervention showed that the beings had been gradually preparing humanity for the current transition over a period of millennia. Each generation had been given slightly more advanced knowledge and capabilities, building toward the moment when the species would be ready to take its place in the larger cosmic community. The acceleration of human technological development over the past few centuries was not entirely the result of human ingenuity, but had been guided by the being's influence. Key discoveries in science, medicine, and technology had been inspired by carefully timed interventions designed to prepare humanity for the advanced capabilities they would need in the post-transition world. This long-term guidance explained many of the puzzling aspects of human development. The rapid advancement in certain fields, the simultaneous discovery of similar concepts by researchers in different locations, and the intuitive leaps that had led to breakthrough innovations all reflected the being's subtle influence on human consciousness. The group's enhanced abilities were allowing them to perceive the approaching convergence with increasing clarity and detail. They could feel the tension building in the collective human consciousness as unconscious awareness of the impending change began to penetrate the barriers that had kept it hidden. Dreams were becoming more vivid and prophetic across the general population. Intuitive abilities were spontaneously manifesting in people who had never displayed such capacities before. Artists were creating works that seemed to transcend conventional aesthetic boundaries, producing paintings, music, and literature that captured themes and concepts that hadn't yet entered mainstream consciousness. Scientists were making discoveries that leaped far beyond the current state of knowledge, developing theories and technologies that shouldn't have been possible with existing understanding. The phenomenon was not limited to creative and intellectual pursuits. People in all walks of life were beginning to display enhanced capabilities and insights that suggested the activation of latent human potentials. Medical professionals were achieving impossible cures through intuitive understanding of their patients' conditions. Engineers were developing technologies that incorporated principles they couldn't quite explain. Even ordinary individuals were beginning to demonstrate telepathic abilities, and precognitive awareness. Janet's work at the hospital had become a daily demonstration of these emerging capabilities. She found herself able to diagnose conditions that weren't apparent through conventional examination, to predict which treatments would be most effective for each patient, and to accelerate healing processes through methods that she understood intuitively but couldn't explain scientifically. Her colleagues were beginning to notice her unusual success rate, but they attributed it to exceptional skill rather than enhanced abilities. The beings had warned her to be cautious about displaying her capabilities too openly, as premature revelation could disrupt the carefully planned integration process. The general population needed to be prepared gradually for the reality of expanded human potential. Michael's technical work had similarly benefited from his enhanced abilities. He found himself able to understand and repair complex systems that should have been beyond his knowledge and experience. His insights into mechanical and electronic principles were leading to innovations that his colleagues couldn't quite comprehend, but recognized as genuinely advanced. The beings had provided him with access to technological principles that were decades ahead of current human understanding. He was learning to work with energy systems that didn't rely on conventional power sources, materials that could change their properties based on environmental conditions, and devices that seemed to operate according to principles that transcended known physical laws. The challenge was integrating these advanced concepts into existing technological frameworks without revealing their true origins. Michael was developing a reputation as an exceptionally innovative engineer, but he had to be careful not to introduce concepts that were too far beyond current human understanding. Tom Bradley's agricultural work had become a testing ground for the environmental modifications that were being implemented on a global scale. His ranch was serving as a model for the sustainable farming practices that would be necessary in the post-transition world. The techniques he was developing combined traditional agricultural wisdom with advanced understanding of biological and ecological systems. The beings had shown him how to work with the planet's natural energy patterns to enhance crop growth and soil fertility. He was learning to communicate with plant and animal consciousness in ways that allowed him to optimize growing conditions and prevent disease without relying on chemical interventions. The results were remarkable. His crops were producing yields that exceeded anything he had achieved using conventional methods, and his livestock were displaying unusual health and vitality. The techniques were attracting attention from other farmers in the region, providing opportunities to gradually introduce the new methods to a wider audience. Dr. Chen's documentation of the group's experiences had evolved into a comprehensive study of human consciousness in transition. Her research was providing insights into the psychological and social changes that would characterize the post-convergence world. The patterns she was discovering suggested that the being's intervention was not simply imposing an alien agenda on humanity, but was facilitating the emergence of capabilities that were already latent within human potential. The enhanced abilities that the group members were displaying were not entirely foreign additions, but were developments of capacities that had always existed in rudimentary form. The beings were not creating new forms of consciousness, but were helping humanity access and develop aspects of awareness that had been dormant for millennia. This realization had profound implications for understanding the nature of human potential and the possibilities for future development. If the enhanced abilities were natural human capabilities that had been suppressed or forgotten, then the transition was not a transformation into something alien, but was a return to humanity's true nature. The group's research was beginning to attract attention from other professionals who were encountering similar phenomena. Through secure communications networks, they were able to share information and coordinate research with colleagues around the world who were studying the emergence of enhanced human capabilities. The global nature of the phenomenon was becoming increasingly apparent. Reports were coming in from every continent of individuals displaying abilities that exceeded normal human limitations. The pattern was consistent across all cultures and social systems, suggesting that the being's intervention was comprehensive and coordinated on a planetary scale. The timing of these developments was clearly not coincidental. The beings had spent millennia preparing for this moment, and all of their careful planning was now coming to fruition. The convergence point was approaching, and with it would come the revelation that would change everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the universe. The group's meetings had taken on an atmosphere of anticipation mixed with apprehension. They knew that they were standing at the threshold of one of the most significant events in human history. The decisions they made and the actions they took in the coming months could influence the course of human development for generations to come. They had been chosen for this role not because they were special or superior to other humans, but because they possessed the specific combination of abilities and experiences that would be necessary to help their species navigate the challenges ahead. Their enhanced capabilities were not rewards or gifts, but were tools that would be essential for the work they would be called upon to perform. The beings had made it clear that the success of the transition would depend on the presence of prepared individuals who could serve as bridges between the old world and the new. These individuals would need to be able to function effectively in both realities, helping others understand and adapt to the changes that were occurring. Janet's medical training and enhanced healing abilities would be crucial for helping humans cope with the physical changes that would accompany the transition. Michael's technical expertise and understanding of advanced technologies would be essential for maintaining and operating the systems that would be introduced as part of the integration process. Tom Bradley's connection to the land and understanding of ecological systems would be vital for helping humanity develop sustainable relationships with the transformed environment. Dr. Chen's research and documentation efforts would provide the historical record that future generations would need to understand how the transformation had occurred. Each member of the group was developing specialized knowledge and capabilities that would be crucial for different aspects of the transition process. They were becoming the foundation of a new kind of human society, one that would be characterized by enhanced abilities, expanded consciousness, and direct participation in a larger cosmic community. The being's final preparations for the convergence point were becoming increasingly visible to those who knew how to look for them. Atmospheric anomalies were being detected by sensitive instruments around the world. Electromagnetic disturbances were affecting communication systems and electronic devices. Gravitational fluctuations were causing subtle but measurable changes in the behavior of physical objects. These phenomena were not random, but were part of a carefully orchestrated preparation for the moment when the hidden aspects of the being's intervention would be revealed to the general population. The convergence point would mark the end of the secret phase of the transition and the beginning of open integration between human and alien consciousness. The group's enhanced abilities were allowing them to perceive the approach of this moment with increasing clarity. They could feel the tension building in the collective human consciousness as unconscious awareness of the impending change began to penetrate the barriers that had kept it hidden. The time for preparation was drawing to a close. Soon, they would be called upon to fulfill the roles they had been trained for, to serve as bridges between the world that was ending and the world that was beginning. They had been chosen not because they were special, but because they possessed the tools and knowledge necessary to help as many people as possible navigate the transition successfully. The convergence was approaching, and with it would come the revelation that would transform everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the cosmos. The group stood ready to help their species take its next step into a larger and more complex reality, one where the boundaries between human and alien, between individual and collective, would be forever changed. As they prepared for the challenges ahead, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as traumatic encounters with the unknown had evolved into an understanding of their crucial role in humanity's future. They had been forged in the crucible of alien contact and were now ready to help guide their species through the most significant transformation in its history. The night sky above them held promises of revelations that would soon change everything. The stars that had once seemed so distant and mysterious would soon be recognized as waypoints in a vast network of conscious beings, and the entities who had guided human development from the shadows would finally step into the light, ready to welcome humanity into the larger community of evolved consciousness that filled the universe. The convergence was coming, and with it would come the transformation of everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the cosmos. The group that had been shaped by alien contact was ready to help their species navigate this monumental change, to serve as guides and teachers in the new world that was about to be born. The weight of their responsibility pressed down on the group as they realized the convergence was no longer a distant possibility, but an imminent reality. Janet's latest medical readings had detected something unprecedented in the blood work of patients who had shown no previous signs of contact. Microscopic changes were occurring at the cellular level, modifications so subtle that conventional testing would miss them entirely, but her enhanced perception could see them clearly. These weren't random mutations or signs of disease. They were systematic alterations that appeared to be preparing human physiology for something beyond current medical understanding. The changes were occurring in specific patterns that suggested a deliberate engineering process, one that was affecting people who had never reported any unusual experiences or encounters. Michael's technical monitoring equipment had begun detecting frequency patterns that didn't match any known natural or artificial source. The signals were emanating from locations around the globe, creating a network of communication that operated on principles far beyond human technology. When he attempted to trace the source of these transmissions, the readings would shift and change, as if the network was aware of his surveillance and was actively avoiding detection. The sophistication of this communication system was staggering. It appeared to be coordinating activities across vast distances instantaneously, suggesting that the beings possessed technology that could transcend the limitations of space and time. The network was clearly preparing for something significant, with activity levels increasing exponentially as each day passed. Tom Bradley's environmental monitoring had revealed changes that were occurring at an accelerated pace. The atmospheric modifications that had been gradual and subtle for years were now happening with startling rapidity. Chemical compositions were shifting, magnetic field patterns were fluctuating, and energy levels in the planet's core were building towards some kind of critical threshold. The planet itself seemed to be responding to these changes in ways that defied conventional understanding. Weather patterns were becoming increasingly unpredictable, but rather than chaotic, they appeared to be following a complex design that was reshaping the global climate according to some predetermined plan. The beings weren't just modifying the environment, they were orchestrating a complete transformation of the planet's fundamental systems. Dr. Chen's psychological research had uncovered something that filled her with both fascination and dread. The collective unconscious of humanity was beginning to register the approaching change in ways that were manifesting as widespread anxiety, prophetic dreams, and spontaneous psychic phenomena. People who had never displayed any unusual abilities were suddenly experiencing visions, telepathic episodes, and precognitive flashes that seemed to be preparing them for a reality they couldn't yet comprehend. The psychological preparation was not random, but appeared to be following the same systematic approach that characterized all of the being's activities. Individuals were being exposed to gradually increasing levels of awareness. Their consciousness slowly expanded to accommodate concepts and experiences that would have been overwhelming if introduced all at once. What made this process particularly unsettling was its universality. The psychological changes were occurring across all demographic groups, cultures, and social systems simultaneously. The beings were not targeting specific populations, but were implementing a global transformation of human consciousness that would affect every person on the planet. Janet's most recent encounter had provided her with glimpses of the infrastructure that had been constructed to support the convergence. Hidden facilities existed in locations that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, massive installations that contained technologies and capabilities that boggled the mind. These facilities were staffed by hybrid beings who moved with the efficiency of a well-coordinated organization that had been planning this moment for generations. The scale of the operation was beyond anything she had previously imagined. Thousands of hybrid beings were working in perfect synchronization, monitoring every aspect of the transition process and making real-time adjustments to ensure that everything proceeded according to plan. The level of coordination and precision suggested an intelligence that operated on a scale that was difficult for human consciousness to grasp. Within these facilities, Janet had seen chambers containing what appeared to be backup copies of human consciousness, preserved versions of individuals who had been selected for integration. The beings explained that these were not replacements, but were insurance policies, ways to ensure that valuable human genetic and psychological material would not be lost if the transition process encountered unexpected difficulties. Michael's training had progressed to the point where he could begin to understand the true scope of the being's technological capabilities. They possessed devices that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, tools that could reshape matter and energy at will, and transportation systems that could traverse vast distances by folding space itself. The technology was not based on mechanical principles, but operated through direct manipulation of consciousness itself. The beings had learned to use focused intention and mental discipline to influence the quantum field that underlaid all physical reality. Their devices were not machines in the conventional sense, but were crystallized thoughts, consciousness given form and function. This revelation helped explain many of the puzzling aspects of the being's abilities. Their seeming mastery of impossible technologies, their ability to appear and disappear at will, their capacity to influence human consciousness directly, all made sense when understood as applications of consciousness-based technology. The beings were teaching Michael to operate these devices, but the training required fundamental changes in his understanding of the nature of reality itself. He was learning to perceive the universe not as a collection of separate objects, but as a unified field of consciousness that could be influenced through properly directed intention. Tom Bradley's connection to the environmental monitoring systems had revealed that the planet's transformation was entering its final phase. The modifications that had been implemented over decades were now reaching a point where they would become irreversible. The Earth was being prepared for a new form of existence, one that would allow it to serve as a bridge between multiple dimensions of reality. The environmental changes were not destroying the planet, but were enhancing its natural capabilities to support expanded forms of consciousness. The atmosphere was being modified to carry energy patterns that would facilitate telepathic communication. The magnetic field was being adjusted to support technologies that operated on principles beyond current human understanding. The biological systems of the planet were also being prepared for the new reality. Plants and animals were developing characteristics that would allow them to thrive in the enhanced environment while still maintaining their essential nature. The transformation was not replacing Earth's natural systems, but was expanding them to accommodate new forms of life and consciousness. Dr. Chen's documentation of the group's experiences had evolved into something resembling a field guide for navigating the transition. Her research was providing practical insights into the psychological and social changes that would characterize the post-convergence world, information that would be crucial for helping others understand and adapt to the new reality. The patterns she was discovering suggested that the being's intervention was not simply imposing an alien agenda on humanity, but was facilitating the emergence of capabilities that were already latent within human potential. The enhanced abilities that were beginning to manifest in people around the world were not foreign additions, but were developments of capacities that had always existed in dormant form. This realization was both encouraging and disturbing. If the enhanced abilities were natural human capabilities that had been suppressed or forgotten, then the transition represented a return to humanity's true nature rather than a transformation into something alien. But it also raised questions about why these abilities had been dormant for so long and what had caused them to be suppressed in the first place. The group's research was beginning to attract attention from sources they hadn't expected. Government agencies that had been monitoring unusual phenomena were starting to take notice of the patterns that were emerging. Military installations were reporting equipment malfunctions that seemed to be connected to the same energy signatures that the group had been tracking. The beings had anticipated this development and had provided guidance on how to handle official inquiries. The group was instructed to be cooperative but cautious, sharing information that would help authorities understand the situation without revealing details that could disrupt the carefully planned integration process. Janet's medical connections had put her in contact with healthcare professionals around the world who were encountering similar phenomena. Through secure communications networks, they were sharing information about the physiological changes they were observing in their patients, changes that suggested a global transformation of human biology. The medical evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Genetic modifications were occurring at rates that should have been impossible through natural processes. Neurological changes were enhancing mental capabilities in ways that conventional medicine couldn't explain. Physical healing was accelerating beyond anything that current understanding of human biology could account for. The pattern was consistent across all populations and geographic regions. The beings were not targeting specific groups, but were implementing a comprehensive transformation of human physiology that would prepare the species for the enhanced capabilities that would be available in the post-transition world. Michael's technical work had begun to incorporate principles that he couldn't have imagined just months earlier. The devices he was learning to operate seemed to respond to his intentions as much as to his physical manipulations. The boundary between technology and consciousness was becoming increasingly blurred as he developed the ability to interface directly with systems that operated on principles beyond conventional understanding. The implications of this development were staggering. If consciousness could directly influence physical reality, then the distinction between thought and action, between intention and manifestation, was far less clear than humans had believed. The beings were not just sharing their technology, they were teaching humanity to access capabilities that had always existed, but had been forgotten or suppressed. Tom Bradley's agricultural experiments had become a showcase for the possibilities that would be available in the post-transition world. His crops were producing yields that exceeded anything achieved through conventional methods, and his livestock were displaying health and vitality that seemed to transcend normal biological limitations. The techniques he was developing were based on principles that combined traditional agricultural wisdom with advanced understanding of consciousness and energy. He was learning to communicate with plant and animal consciousness in ways that allowed him to optimize growing conditions and prevent disease without relying on chemical interventions. The results were attracting attention from agricultural researchers and government agencies who were trying to understand how he was achieving such remarkable outcomes. Tom was careful to share his knowledge gradually, introducing concepts that could be accepted within existing frameworks while preparing for the day when the full truth could be revealed. Dr. Chen's psychological research had uncovered evidence that the collective unconscious of humanity was beginning to register the approaching change in ways that were manifesting as widespread cultural shifts. Art, literature, music, and film were beginning to reflect themes and concepts that hadn't yet entered mainstream consciousness, but were clearly emerging from deep psychological sources. The cultural preparation was not random, but appeared to be following the same systematic approach that characterized all of the being's activities. Humanity was being prepared psychologically for concepts and experiences that would have been overwhelming if introduced without proper foundation. The influence was subtle but pervasive. Creative individuals were finding themselves drawn to themes involving transformation, transcendence, and contact with non-human intelligence. Scientists were making discoveries that pointed toward expanded understanding of consciousness and reality. Philosophers and spiritual leaders were developing concepts that bridged the gap between traditional human understanding and the expanded awareness that would characterize the post-transition world. The group's meetings had become intensive planning sessions for the work that lay ahead. They were developing protocols for identifying and supporting individuals who were beginning to experience the early stages of the transition, creating networks of communication that could function effectively even under chaotic conditions. Janet's medical expertise was being focused on developing treatment protocols for the physiological changes that humans would experience during the integration process. She was learning to work with the body's energy systems to facilitate transformation while minimizing discomfort and psychological trauma. Michael's technical knowledge was being directed toward maintaining and operating the advanced technologies that would become available as the transition progressed. He was developing simplified interfaces that would allow unenhanced humans to interact with consciousness-based systems while they adapted to their new capabilities. Tom Bradley's agricultural experience was being applied to developing sustainable food production systems that could function in the transformed environment. He was creating models for communities that could thrive in the post-transition world while maintaining connection to the natural systems that supported all life. Dr. Chen's research and documentation efforts were being focused on creating resources that would help people understand and cope with the psychological aspects of the transition. She was developing therapeutic techniques that could help individuals process the reality of expanded consciousness while maintaining their essential humanity. The being's final preparations for the convergence point were becoming increasingly visible to those who were monitoring the situation. Atmospheric disturbances were intensifying. Electromagnetic anomalies were affecting communication systems worldwide, and gravitational fluctuations were causing subtle but measurable changes in the behavior of physical objects. These phenomena were not random, but were part of a carefully orchestrated preparation for the moment when the hidden aspects of the being's intervention would be revealed to the general population. The convergence point would mark the end of the secret phase of the transition and the beginning of open integration between human and alien consciousness. The group's enhanced abilities were allowing them to perceive the approach of this moment with increasing clarity and precision. They could feel the tension building in the collective human consciousness as unconscious awareness of the impending change began to penetrate the barriers that had kept it hidden. Dreams were becoming more vivid and prophetic across the general population. Intuitive abilities were spontaneously manifesting in people who had never displayed such capacities before. Artists were creating works that seemed to transcend conventional boundaries, producing paintings, music, and literature that captured themes and concepts that hadn't yet entered mainstream consciousness. The phenomenon was not limited to creative and intellectual pursuits. People in all walks of life were beginning to display enhanced capabilities and insights that suggested the activation of latent human potentials. The transformation was accelerating, and the time for gradual preparation was coming to an end. Janet's latest encounters had revealed that the beings were experiencing something analogous to anticipation as the convergence approached. Their vast intelligence and technological capabilities did not make them immune to uncertainty about the outcome of the transition process. They had guided many species through similar transformations, but each one presented unique challenges and variables that could not be completely predicted or controlled. The success of the transition would depend not only on the being's preparation, but on humanity's response to the revelation of their presence and the reality of the transformation that was occurring. The beings had learned from previous transitions that the key factor determining success was the presence of prepared individuals who could serve as bridges between the old reality and the new. Michael's understanding of the being's true nature had deepened to the point where he could perceive them as they actually were, rather than as they appeared in their projected forms. They were consciousness that had evolved beyond the need for physical form, entities that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously and could manifest in material reality when necessary. The physical forms that humans perceived during encounters were simplified projections designed to provide a reference point that human consciousness could process. The being's actual nature was so far beyond human comprehension that direct contact would have been impossible without these intermediary forms. This revelation helped explain many of the puzzling aspects of the abduction phenomenon. The being's seeming inconsistencies, their ability to appear and disappear at will, their mastery of technologies that seemed to violate physical laws, all made sense when understood in the context of consciousness that operated according to principles that transcended material limitations. Tom Bradley's connection to the environmental monitoring systems had progressed to the point where he could perceive the planet's transformation as a living process. The changes were not being imposed from outside, but were emerging from the planet's own consciousness as it responded to the guidance and influence of the beings. The Earth itself was participating in the transformation, its natural systems evolving to accommodate the new forms of consciousness that would inhabit it. The planet was not being conquered or replaced, but was being enhanced, its capabilities expanded to serve as a bridge between multiple dimensions of reality. The environmental changes were creating conditions that would support both traditional Earth life and the hybrid beings who would soon become its primary inhabitants. The atmosphere was being modified to carry energy patterns that would facilitate telepathic communication. The magnetic field was being adjusted to support technologies that operated on consciousness-based principles. Dr. Chen's research had revealed that the psychological preparation of humanity was entering its final phase. The collective unconscious was beginning to register the approaching change in ways that were manifesting as widespread anxiety, prophetic dreams, and spontaneous psychic phenomena across all populations. The psychological changes were not random, but were following a carefully designed pattern that would prepare human consciousness for the expanded awareness that would characterize the post-transition world. People were being exposed to gradually increasing levels of unusual experiences, their minds slowly opened to concepts and realities that would have been overwhelming if introduced all at once. The preparation was comprehensive and systematic, affecting every aspect of human psychology and culture. Religious and spiritual systems were evolving to accommodate expanded understanding of consciousness and reality. Scientific paradigms were shifting to include concepts that had previously been dismissed as impossible or unscientific. The group's role in this process was becoming increasingly clear. They would serve as interpreters and guides, helping people understand the changes that were occurring and providing support during the difficult period of adjustment that would follow the revelation. Their enhanced abilities would allow them to function effectively in both the old reality and the new, serving as bridges between worlds. The convergence point was approaching rapidly, and with it would come the moment when everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the universe would be transformed. The group stood ready to help their species navigate this monumental change, to serve as guides and teachers in the new world that was about to be born. As they prepared for the challenges ahead, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as terrifying encounters with the unknown had evolved into an understanding of their crucial role in humanity's future. They had been chosen not because they were special or superior to other humans, but because they possessed the specific combination of abilities and experiences that would be necessary to help their species survive and thrive in the expanded reality that awaited. The night sky above them held promises of revelations that would soon change everything. The stars that had once seemed so distant and mysterious would soon be recognized as waypoints in a vast network of conscious beings. And the entities who had guided human development from the shadows would finally step into the light, ready to welcome humanity into the larger community of evolved consciousness that filled the universe. The time for preparation was ending. The convergence was at hand, and with it would come the transformation of everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the cosmos. The group that had been forged in the crucible of alien contact was ready to help their species navigate this monumental change, to serve as guides and teachers in the new world that was about to be born. The future that awaited was both terrifying and magnificent, a reality where the boundaries between human and alien, between individual and collective, between thought and manifestation, would be forever changed. Humanity was about to take its next evolutionary step, and those who had been prepared through contact with the beings would help guide the species through the most significant transformation in its history. The convergence was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the group processed the magnitude of what lay ahead, they began to understand that their individual experiences had been part of something far more orchestrated than they had initially realized. The beings hadn't simply chosen them at random from the general population. Each of their life paths had been carefully guided from childhood, their careers, relationships, and even their personalities shaped to prepare them for the roles they would need to fulfill. Janet's memories of her earliest encounters now revealed a pattern of subtle influence that had extended throughout her entire life. Her decision to become a nurse hadn't been entirely her own choice, but had been gently guided by the beings who recognized that her natural empathy and healing abilities would be crucial during the transition period. Every patient she had treated, every medical procedure she had learned, had been preparing her for the day when she would need to help humans adapt to physiological changes that conventional medicine couldn't address. The realization that her entire life had been orchestrated by alien intelligence was both liberating and terrifying. On one hand, it explained the sense of purpose and destiny that had always driven her, the feeling that she was meant for something greater than routine hospital work. On the other hand, it raised disturbing questions about free will and the authenticity of her own choices and accomplishments. Michael's technical aptitude had been similarly cultivated over decades of subtle intervention. His fascination with mechanical systems, his intuitive understanding of complex technologies, his ability to see solutions that eluded more experienced engineers, all had been enhanced through regular contact with beings who possessed technological capabilities beyond human comprehension. Every breakthrough he had achieved, every innovation he had developed, had been building toward his eventual role as a bridge between human and alien technology. The beings had been patient and methodical in their approach, allowing him to develop naturally while providing just enough guidance to ensure that his abilities would be available when needed. They had been careful not to make him too dependent on their assistance, recognizing that he would need to function independently during the chaotic period that would follow the convergence. Tom Bradley's connection to the land and his understanding of natural systems had been developed through a lifetime of experiences that had seemed random but were actually carefully orchestrated. His decision to become a rancher, his choice of location, even his discovery of the environmental changes occurring on his property, had all been guided by beings who recognized that his skills would be essential for helping humanity adapt to the transformed planet. The cattle mutilations that had first brought him into contact with the beings now revealed themselves as part of a comprehensive biological monitoring program that had been using his ranch as a testing ground for the environmental modifications that would eventually be implemented globally. Every change in his livestock's behavior, every unusual phenomenon he had observed, had been providing data that would inform the final phases of the planetary transformation. Dr. Chen's psychological expertise had been developed through professional experiences that had prepared her for the unique challenges of documenting and understanding the alien contact phenomenon. Her training in trauma therapy, her research into altered states of consciousness, her ability to maintain professional objectivity while dealing with extraordinary claims, all had been shaped by encounters with beings who knew that her skills would be crucial for helping others process the reality of expanded consciousness. The beings had been particularly careful in their guidance of Dr. Chen, recognizing that her role as a documenter and analyst would be essential for creating the historical record that future generations would need to understand how the transformation had occurred. Her research into the group's experiences was providing insights that would be crucial for helping humanity navigate the psychological challenges of the post-convergence world. As the group's understanding of their situation deepened, they began to perceive the broader patterns that governed the being's intervention in human affairs. The selection process that had identified them as suitable candidates for enhancement was part of a comprehensive evaluation system that had been assessing human potential for generations. Genetic markers, psychological profiles, and life experiences had all been analyzed to identify individuals who possessed the specific combination of traits that would be necessary for different aspects of the transition process. The beings had been conducting this evaluation process across all human populations simultaneously, creating a global network of enhanced individuals who would be positioned to help their communities navigate the challenges ahead. Each person had been selected for specific qualities that would be valuable during the transition period, and their enhancement had been tailored to maximize their effectiveness in their assigned roles. Janet's medical knowledge and natural healing abilities made her ideal for helping humans adapt to the physiological changes that would accompany the integration process. Her empathetic nature and ability to remain calm under pressure would be crucial for providing emotional support during the difficult period of adjustment that would follow the revelation. Michael's technical expertise and problem-solving abilities would be essential for maintaining and operating the advanced technologies that would become available as the transition progressed. His practical approach to complex problems and his ability to explain technical concepts in simple terms would be valuable for helping others understand and adapt to the new technological reality. Tom Bradley's connection to the natural world and his understanding of ecological systems would be vital for helping humanity develop sustainable relationships with the transformed environment. His experience with agricultural systems and his ability to work with natural processes rather than against them would be crucial for ensuring that human communities could thrive in the post-convergence world. Dr. Chen's research skills and analytical mind would be essential for documenting the transition process and helping others understand the psychological and social changes that would characterize the new reality. Her ability to remain objective while dealing with extraordinary phenomena would be valuable for creating credible records of the transformation. The beings had been equally careful in their selection of enhancement techniques for each individual. The abilities that each group member had developed were not random gifts, but were precisely calibrated tools designed to maximize their effectiveness in their specific roles. The enhancements had been introduced gradually, allowing each person to adapt to their new capabilities while maintaining their essential humanity. Janet's healing abilities had been enhanced through exposure to energy fields that had modified her cellular structure, allowing her to perceive and manipulate the human body's energy systems. The changes had been implemented slowly over many years, ensuring that her enhanced capabilities would integrate seamlessly with her existing medical knowledge and skills. Michael's technical abilities had been enhanced through direct neural interface with alien technologies, allowing him to understand and operate systems that were based on principles beyond current human comprehension. The enhancements had been designed to work with his existing knowledge and experience rather than replacing them, ensuring that he would be able to function effectively in both technological paradigms. Tom Bradley's environmental abilities had been enhanced through exposure to the being's monitoring systems, allowing him to perceive the planet's energy patterns and natural cycles with unprecedented clarity. The enhancements had been carefully calibrated to work with his existing understanding of agricultural and ecological systems, expanding his capabilities rather than replacing his natural knowledge. Dr. Chen's analytical abilities had been enhanced through exposure to the being's information processing systems, allowing her to perceive patterns and connections that would be invisible to unenhanced human consciousness. The enhancements had been designed to work with her existing research skills and psychological training, expanding her capacity for understanding rather than replacing her human perspective. The coordination of these enhancements across thousands of individuals worldwide represented a level of planning and organization that was difficult for human consciousness to comprehend. The beings had been simultaneously monitoring and guiding the development of selected humans across all continents and cultures, ensuring that the necessary capabilities would be available when the transition began. The logistics of this operation were staggering. The beings had needed to maintain detailed records of millions of individuals, tracking their genetic development, psychological evolution, and life experiences over multiple generations. They had needed to coordinate interventions across vast distances and time periods, ensuring that each person would be ready to fulfill their assigned role when the convergence occurred. The technology required for this level of coordination was beyond anything that human science could imagine. The beings possessed communication systems that could operate instantaneously across galactic distances, monitoring devices that could track individual consciousness across multiple dimensions, and transportation methods that could traverse space and time with perfect precision. Janet's latest encounters had provided glimpses of the command centers where this vast operation was being coordinated. These facilities existed in locations that seemed to be partially outside normal space-time, massive installations that contained technologies and capabilities that challenged the fundamental assumptions of human physics. The beings who staffed these centers moved with the efficiency of entities who had been preparing for this moment for millennia. The scale of the operation was matched by its precision. Every aspect of the transition process had been planned and rehearsed countless times. The beings had run simulations of possible outcomes, prepared contingency plans for unexpected developments, and created backup systems to ensure that the process would continue even if key components failed. Michael's training had progressed to the point where he could begin to understand the principles that governed these advanced systems. The being's technology was not based on mechanical manipulation of matter and energy, but operated through direct interface with the fundamental information structures that underlaid physical reality. Their devices were not machines in the conventional sense, but were crystallized consciousness, intention given form and function. The implications of this revelation were profound. If consciousness could directly influence the basic structures of reality, then the distinction between thought and physical manifestation was far less clear than humans had believed. The beings were not just sharing their technology, they were teaching humanity to access capabilities that had always existed but had been forgotten or suppressed. Tom Bradley's connection to the environmental monitoring systems had revealed that the planet's transformation was being guided by similar principles. The beings were not imposing changes on the Earth through brute force, but were working with the planet's own consciousness to facilitate its evolution toward a new state of being. The environmental modifications were not artificial interventions, but were the planet's own response to guidance and influence from more evolved consciousness. The Earth itself was an active participant in the transformation, its natural systems evolving to accommodate the new forms of consciousness that would inhabit it. The planet was not being conquered or replaced, but was being enhanced, its capabilities expanded to serve as a bridge between multiple dimensions of reality. Dr. Chen's research had revealed that similar principles governed the psychological preparation of humanity. The beings were not forcing changes on human consciousness, but were working with natural evolutionary processes to facilitate the emergence of capabilities that were already latent within human potential. The enhanced abilities that were beginning to manifest in people around the world were not foreign additions, but were developments of capacities that had always existed in dormant form. The psychological preparation was following the same careful, systematic approach that characterized all of the being's activities. Individuals were being exposed to gradually increasing levels of unusual experiences, their minds slowly opened to concepts and realities that would have been overwhelming if introduced all at once. The process was designed to work with human psychology rather than against it, facilitating natural development rather than forcing artificial change. The group's meetings had evolved into intensive coordination sessions as they prepared for their expanded roles in the coming revelation. They were developing protocols for identifying and supporting individuals who were beginning to experience the early stages of the transition, creating networks of communication that could function effectively even under the chaotic conditions that would characterize the convergence period. Janet's medical expertise was being focused on developing treatment protocols for the physiological changes that humans would experience during the integration process. She was learning to work with the body's energy systems to facilitate transformation while minimizing discomfort and psychological trauma. Her protocols would be essential for helping medical professionals around the world understand and treat the symptoms that would emerge as the transition accelerated. Michael's technical knowledge was being directed toward maintaining and operating the advanced technologies that would become available as the transition progressed. He was developing simplified interfaces that would allow unenhanced humans to interact with consciousness-based systems while they adapted to their new capabilities. His work would be crucial for ensuring that human society could continue to function during the period of technological transformation. Tom Bradley's agricultural experience was being applied to developing sustainable food production systems that could function in the transformed environment. He was creating models for communities that could thrive in the post-convergence world while maintaining connection to the natural systems that supported all life. His techniques would be essential for ensuring that human populations could survive and flourish in the new reality. Dr. Chen's research and documentation efforts were being focused on creating resources that would help people understand and cope with the psychological aspects of the transition. She was developing therapeutic techniques that could help individuals process the reality of expanded consciousness while maintaining their essential humanity. Her work would be crucial for preventing the psychological collapse that could occur if people were unprepared for the magnitude of the changes they would experience. The being's final preparations for the convergence point were accelerating at a pace that made it clear the moment of revelation was imminent. Atmospheric disturbances were intensifying daily. Electromagnetic anomalies were affecting communication systems worldwide, and gravitational fluctuations were causing increasingly noticeable changes in the behavior of physical objects. These phenomena were not random, but were part of a carefully orchestrated preparation for the moment when the hidden aspects of the being's intervention would be revealed to the general population. The convergence point would mark the end of the secret phase of the transition and the beginning of open integration between human and alien consciousness. The group's enhanced abilities were allowing them to perceive the approach of this moment with increasing clarity and urgency. They could feel the tension building in the collective human consciousness as unconscious awareness of the impending change began to penetrate the barriers that had kept it hidden. The psychological preparation that had been gradual and subtle for decades was now accelerating toward a crescendo that would reshape human awareness forever. Dreams were becoming more vivid and prophetic across all populations. People who had never experienced psychic phenomena were suddenly having visions of possible futures, telepathic communications with unknown entities, and spontaneous out-of-body experiences that defied conventional understanding. The boundaries between normal and paranormal consciousness were dissolving as humanity prepared for the expanded awareness that would characterize the post-convergence world. Artists, writers, and musicians were creating works that seemed to channel information from sources beyond their conscious knowledge. Scientists were making discoveries that leaped far beyond the current state of understanding. Religious and spiritual leaders were receiving insights that were transforming their understanding of the nature of consciousness and reality. The phenomenon was not limited to creative and intellectual pursuits. People in all walks of life were beginning to display enhanced capabilities and insights that suggested the activation of latent human potentials that had been dormant for millennia. The transformation was accelerating exponentially and the time for gradual preparation was coming to an end. Janet's most recent encounters had revealed that the beings were experiencing something analogous to anticipation mixed with concern as the convergence approached. Their vast intelligence and technological capabilities did not make them immune to uncertainty about the outcome of the transition process. They had guided many species through similar transformations, but each one presented unique challenges and variables that could not be completely predicted or controlled. The success of the transition would depend not only on the beings' meticulous preparation, but on humanity's response to the revelation of their presence and the reality of the transformation that was occurring. The beings had learned from previous transitions that the key factor determining success was the presence of prepared individuals who could serve as bridges between the old reality and the new, helping their communities navigate the psychological and social challenges of the convergence. The group had been chosen and prepared for exactly this role. Their enhanced abilities would allow them to function effectively in both the pre-convergence and post-convergence worlds, serving as interpreters and guides for those who would struggle to understand the magnitude of the changes they were experiencing. They would be the human face of the transformation, providing reassurance and support during the most challenging period in human history. As the final preparations continued, the group members found themselves experiencing a profound sense of purpose and responsibility. They understood that the decisions they made and the actions they took in the coming days and weeks could influence the course of human development for generations to come. The weight of this responsibility was both empowering and terrifying, but they were determined to fulfill their roles with wisdom, compassion, and courage. The convergence was no longer a distant possibility, but an imminent reality. The beings had spent millennia preparing for this moment, and all of their careful planning was now coming to fruition. The hidden phase of human evolution was ending, and the open phase was about to begin. Humanity was about to discover that it had never been alone in the universe, and that its development had been guided by intelligence far beyond its current understanding. The revelation would transform everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the cosmos. The stars that had once seemed so distant and mysterious would be recognized as waypoints in a vast network of conscious beings. The entities who had guided human development from the shadows would finally step into the light, ready to welcome humanity into the larger community of evolved consciousness that filled the universe. The group that had been forged in the crucible of alien contact was ready to help their species navigate this monumental change, to serve as guides and teachers in the new world that was about to be born. They had been prepared for this moment through years of careful training and enhancement, and they were determined to fulfill their destiny with honor and dedication. The convergence was coming, and with it would come the transformation of everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the cosmos. The future that awaited was both terrifying and magnificent, a reality where the boundaries between human and alien, between individual and collective, between thought and manifestation, would be forever changed. Humanity was about to take its next evolutionary step, and those who had been chosen to guide this transformation were ready to help their species embrace its destiny among the stars. The age of isolation was ending, and the age of cosmic consciousness was about to begin. The greatest adventure in human history was about to unfold, and nothing would ever be the same again.